You are going to have a terrific experience today. I'm Eric Rhodes, and today our guest is Tim Rees. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you. Hello.
So this is big news. You've just moved all the way across the country. You want to tell everybody where you are, or is it a big secret?
No, I think by now the secret's probably just about out. We're in Maquoketa, Iowa, the hometown of my friend artist Rose Franson.
Oh man. Well, you're gonna build an art community there. You know, once you move there, everybody else will start moving there. That's what happened in Austin is, you know, there Graydon Parish moved there, and then a couple more people there moved there, and then I moved there. And you know, next thing you know, we had this whole community of people there. So that's gonna be exciting.
Yeah, it sure is. Speaking of which, I actually have a friend out from the Bay Area who's an artist, and he's out looking at houses now once he found out I moved out here. So he's looking to relocate his family now. So
Yeah.
it's already started.
Well, I think what's happening is people are starting to think about getting out of the cities, especially when you have young families. You start realizing the importance of your time and your life. And we live, when we're up here, we live in a small community of 2,500 people. And, you know, every time we go out, we run into people that we know. And you just don't realize how many people you get to know until every time you go out, you're just like, oh, there's Bob, there's Mary, you know. So that's going to be really wonderful.
Sure is, yeah.
Yeah. So I want to tell everybody that Tim is our featured artist today at 3 p.m. Every day at 3 p.m. For 166 days now in a row, nonstop, no days off. We've been giving samples of art instruction that we've created on video, including interviews in many cases. And today, the featured artist is Tim. Now, I want you to see this painting, and this painting, just so you have a feel for this, is taller than I am. So, what do you think this is? It's about, is it 6 feet, 7 feet?
Right about 6 feet.
Yeah, and you painted that on a dye bond or something, did you not?
Yeah, the linen mounted to a thicker dye bond.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this was Tim's first video, which is called Modern Figures, and it really goes into a lot of depth, and you're going to get a feel for that today and hear some more about that, and you'll get to see part of the process. Tim will be on at 3 p.m. today, and you go to YouTube or Facebook and you search Streamline Art Video, and that's where you find it. And then you hit subscribe or follow. That way it'll just come to you when it comes live, and that way if you're online. So that'll be terrific. And so that's today. And then Tim has another video coming out in just a very short period of time, which is a portrait sketch video, which is really, really good. So what are you going to talk about today, Tim?
Well, I thought I would walk the audience through my sketching process that I use. It's actually one that I started using when I was first learning back in Chicago, drawing people on the train. And it has since been adapted to acclimate to the styles of painting that I've kind of weaved throughout my career.
Right.
So there's quite a bit of thinking involved in the sketch. It's not just sort of a practice for the sake of practice. It's a very informative process that I now use for the preliminaries of all of my paintings.
Well, this is exciting because I think this is the first time we've had anybody on the daily, at least on this show that I do every day at noon. I think you're the first one that's done any sketching. So this is something everybody wants and everybody needs, and we all, you know, we all suffer with sketching. Maybe some people don't, but most of us do. So this is going to be helpful. And can you just before you get into it, because we're going to drop off in a minute and make a couple of announcements. But would you just show, so people know what they're about to see, would you show a couple examples of your work? We can kind of see it.
Sure.
But it would be.
Well, pull first some of these are just a drawing and a painting that I have unpacked right now at the studio.
You've just moved, and so you have very little. Can you get that kind of close to the camera so you can really see it? Wow.
This is sort of the charcoal process that I go through for preliminary drawings. Although if I'm doing a transfer for a painting, the process is in graphite and it is a little different. It's actually more similar to what I'm going to show everybody today.
All right.
and this is representative here of the type of painting style that I'm working in currently. So right there.
Oh, perfect. That's beautiful.
So, kind of naturalist looking mixed with a little bit of impressionism. But I really have been interested in getting into using a lead white paint that's thicker and more viscous to sort of model and describe the form. And that's where the sketching becomes really important, because I now use my sketches to figure out the anatomy from a photo that I'm looking at. A lot of times photos don't really describe anatomy very well, so I'm trying to use my knowledge mixed with observation and use the hatching in a drawing or a sketch to discern what the anatomy is, so that when I'm painting it, I can drag the paint over.
So this is kind of a new system that you've developed for yourself.
Yeah, it's pretty recent. I would say within the last year and a half, sort of combined everything that I've learned over the last 10 years and sort of put it into this new way of painting. So now I get a chance to do a little bit of all of the styles of painting that I like and that I'm familiar with, and sort of mash it all up into one painting.
Outstanding. Well, we're looking forward to seeing that and learning more about it in a couple of minutes. And so I'll just drop off real quick and make a couple of quick announcements, and we'll come back to you. And you can, meanwhile, adjust your camera or whatever you need to do. And thank you for being here. This is exciting.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And you can go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thanks. So today I'm going to be walking everyone through my sketching process. This is something that I've used since I started painting back in Chicago 10 years ago. And I've since adapted it to work with any style of painting that I have currently been doing. And so what you're going to see today is the process that I use that's really informative to the paintings that I create. And I'll talk about why that is while I'm doing it. And I'll just show you a few of some of these sketches. Some of these are, 5 years old, it looks like, from the zoo. You can see where I've just sketched animals. It's great sketching at the zoo because you only have, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, sometimes, just a few seconds to get the impression of something and the gesture of something. And my primary focus, especially at this time of my artistic career, was just capturing the impression of things. So it would be the dark and light pattern primarily, and then utilizing a contour if necessary to help the viewer understand the shapes that they're looking at and maybe supply a little bit of energy to the pose. And again, when I would do my paintings, they were much more impressionistic. I wasn't concerned with form and modeling. I was concerned with how the optics and the color were creating an image when we looked at it, but up close it'd be very abstract. And so my sketching sort of reflects that. It's this idea of, using as few lines as possible to be able to describe what it is I'm looking at in the shortest amount of time. And that's kind of the essence of alla prima painting, which, as Eric mentioned, that's the video that will be released pretty soon. It's an alla prima portrait sketch video. And the mentality there is always, how can you do the most amount of work with the least amount of effort?
Hey, Tim, for the people who are listening who don't know what alla prima means, can you explain that?
Sure. Alla prima is literally translates to all at once, and it describes a portrait that's completed in one session, usually 2 or 3 or 4 hours. So they're very quick, often very loose, and they tend to lean more towards the impressionist painting side, although they can look very, very realistic. And this was the type of painting that I was most drawn to when I started, and it requires a lot of quick decisions and good decisions because you really don't have time to go back and sort of noodle and correct what you've put down. And so sketching really aids in that capacity because it just gets you used to having to make fast decisions and the most efficient decisions, especially when you're sketching from life. Today, I don't have the opportunity to sketch from life, so I'll sketch from a photo. But when working from life, certainly a turtle moves slower than a flamingo or a chimpanzee, so I had a lot more time to draw something like this and could flesh it out. But the mentality remains the same. It's try to be as accurate as you can, as quick as you can to get the image. And so as time evolved, my sketching process evolved, and I would use sketching for various things. So maybe to study the composition of a painting, which I did quite often, even quick figure sketches at an open studio, just doing a 1 or 2 minute sketch. And you'll notice that all of these are in ballpoint pen, which is something I started with long before I was a painter. Back when I worked in a hospital doing some insurance work, all we had were pens lying around. And so I just started sketching with ballpoint pens until I got to the point where I was making these really elaborate, highly realistic drawings in ballpoint pen. And it just sort of got me in that mentality of being careful with what I was doing so that I didn't need to erase, and sort of how to adapt to my materials so that I didn't need to erase. And so sketching, especially with a pen like we'll do today, helps you to get in that mentality. And since then, I'd had teachers who encouraged sketching with things like a wax-colored pencil that you couldn't erase, for that very reason. This is a study that I did in London of a Bastien Lepage painting, and then I went to the Leighton House and did a study of drapery. I find it really useful to have a pen because I never have to sharpen it. I can take it anywhere, and I can hit almost the whole range of values with just a ballpoint pen. Here's some anatomical studies with a pen, and this will start to reflect what I'm getting more interested in now, which is using some hatches, some directional marks to describe the way that anatomy is turning and going over the form. And so we'll see a little bit of that in the sketching that I'm doing today. And that, again, mirrors the painting that I'm doing nowadays, where I'm trying to use this thicker stack lead white and drag it over the form to create the illusion of an actual dimensional painting. Here's a little sketch of taking it a little further and getting some shading in there. So today I'm just going to sketch this guy out here. He's a fellow that I actually encountered in the countryside in England. He was just working in a mechanic's shop, and I thought he was one of the most interesting looking fellows, and so he let me take his picture. And this was years ago, and it was with a terrible camera phone, and so it's a very, very grainy photo. Not a lot of good, useful anatomical information here. It's a good impression of him, but there's not a lot more than just the impression. It's very pixelated. It's like a pointillist painting, really. And so this is exactly the type of reference that I would require a sketch to be able to paint, either a preliminary drawing with graphite or a ballpoint pen drawing like I'm about to do now, so that I can really start to understand some of the forms that are happening here, so that when I go to paint it, my painting becomes more informed. They say you should try to paint from life as much as possible because you can see so much more than in a photograph, and that's very true. And so this stage allows me a little bit more support as though I were painting from life, because I'm using my knowledge that I have, my knowledge of anatomy that I've studied over the years, to kind of inform some of the anatomical decisions that I will make. But what you'll see in the beginning is sort of just an impressionist laydown, which is very similar to how I've always done these drawings here. So I'm just going to get the ink flowing. My goal in the beginning here is going to go as light as possible, to where you can barely see the marks that I'm making. And I'm going to attempt to do what's called a no-tan here, which is just a light and dark pattern of the shapes that I see when I squint way down at the picture, starting with the eye sockets here and then moving to the nose. And what you'll notice is that I'm not going to draw any lines in the beginning. And that's pretty important, because a line has a lot of visual weight. So if your line is incorrect, then it's very obvious to the viewer that there's an error in your picture, where this light sort of hazy mapping out here is just a vague indication. And so I can actually adjust them pretty easily, you'll see, without it looking too incorrect to the viewer. So I'm just going to kind of use this really, really light marking to get this map of light and dark. And in the video that we show a little bit of later today, the large figure painting video, I do a process that's similar to this, inside the video. It's called shadow mapping, where I'm doing a detailed drawing of the light and dark pattern of the face. And this is a very similar concept, except that I'm skipping the lines and I'm jumping directly to indicating the shadows, just by squinting, seeing light and dark, and trying to copy that light and dark pattern. And it's actually easier, I think, for the human brain to see patterns of light and dark than it is to see contour lines, because in reality, contour lines don't exist. They're sort of a construct, a man-made construct. But they're very informative. And so we'll talk more about those when we're ready to do them. But for now, I'm just going to try and layer this and get all these shapes blocked in here to where when I squint down, I'm seeing an image that's sort of like a hazy, out of focus version of my reference here. And really the goal here is to go as light with the ballpoint pen as you can. And you can do this with pencil as well, or even with charcoal. The challenge with some of the other mediums is that you have more of a limitation on how many layers you can do before the paper will stop accepting the medium. Whereas a ballpoint pen, I think it tends to allow a bit more. And I'm just measuring with my eye here, which I usually do when sketching from life. I don't usually go out on a train or sit at a coffee shop and try to measure somebody, while I'm sitting across the room. I'm just trying to gauge it all by my eye. But I am still thinking about measuring techniques. So I'm thinking about plumbs, like where does the nose sit underneath the eye socket? And I'm thinking about angles and triangulation, like what is the angle between the corner of the eye and the corner of the nose? And I'm thinking about comparative measurement, like if this distance is here, then how far is it to the end of the head? It's probably about here. And I'm just trying to build those up just with my eye, without having to do any formal measurement. It's good not to be misled, because we look at a lot of artists who will do this without any measuring, and it seems like they're not measuring at all, but they're just measuring with their eye. And that's something that you can develop just like you can develop anything else. And sometimes it requires a lot of measuring with your hand first, actually holding your arm out to do the measurement. Those formal techniques, that's something that I do talk about in that large figurative video. It's kind of a little too much to talk about now, but I'm just trying to get everything lined up and get all those angles correct. Another thing to note is I prefer to sketch on this toned paper here, because that way a light mark with a ballpoint pen is just a little bit darker than that toned paper. That way I don't have to worry so much when I make a mistake, because it's so close to the tone that for the most part it's not going to be visible in the end. Working on white paper, you have to be a little bit more careful, work a little bit harder to ensure that you don't make a mistake. And that's how I started, was just on white computer paper. So I was very, very careful in the beginning. But for sketching, something like this is a little more manageable. Now I'm going to start defining the shapes a little more, but I'm going to look at the edge quality. So for example, anywhere where there's a cast shadow, like this under the eye here, I'll define that a little more with a line. I might deepen some of the eyebrows here. I'm going to try and keep the softer edges, like the top of the eyebrow here, without being outlined. Because anytime I put a line in there, it starts to read as an edge. So I want to be very careful not to throw too many lines on the inside of these shapes, or else it'll look flat right away. And even though it's a sketch, I want there to be a good level of dimension to it. Just gonna throw a little eye shading in there. Kind of look at the level of the eyes here. So up to this point, it's very similar to the way I've always sketched ever since I started as an impressionist, more alla prima artist. And pretty soon here, we're going to move into modeling out some form, which is a newer development for me. Another thing that I'm very deliberate about is keeping the direction of my shading strokes all the same. Some people go crazy with their direction, and I find that when I do that, it tends to confuse the viewer. It becomes very unclear whether or not those strokes that are for shading are intended to describe anatomy or if they're intended to be shading strokes. And so I like to keep the value marks, which are these big shapes here, all one direction, so they kind of recede. And then all these other marks that I'm doing that are different directions, they tend to read more as the anatomy. And so that way your drawing looks a lot cleaner, even though it's still a sketch. Just because it's a sketch doesn't mean it has to be kind of scraggly and chaotic and all over the place.
You guys have any questions, make sure you put them in the comments and I'll read them to him. Happy birthday to Sarah White Harvey, by the way. What color ink is that? Is it black ink?
Yes, yeah, it's pretty. I guess there's a slight bluish tinge to it, but I think it's just black. And sometimes I do have fun with the colors. I've got a red pen also and a blue pen. Kind of just depends on what I'm sketching. So this would be a good, quick sketch if I was out in public. Now, if I'm going to do a little more to inform maybe a painting, this is when I'll start to dig into the anatomy, where I'll start to actually do some of these marks that are directional, forehead mark.
Barbara has a question. It says, have you drawn all your life or did you go to art school? What's the story?
That's a good question. I always kind of doodled and did some drawing when I was growing up. And I got a little more into it in high school. But I also played a lot of sports, and I actually did more writing than I did more artwork. And my high school art teacher told me that the only way you could make a career as an artist is if you were an art teacher at a high school. So I ended up not going to school for that, for art. And it wasn't until years later when I saw a magazine that had the work of Daniel Graves and Jeremy Lipking and Richard Schmid in it, and I realized that you could make a living as an artist. I immediately decided to switch over. I dropped all my classes that I was taking in college and took a workshop at the Scottsdale Artist School, and that was the beginning of me being a painter.
What was the workshop?
It was a Jeremy Lipking workshop.
Started with the best.
Yeah, well, he was the one I saw in the magazine that really caught my eye, so I figured, why not? I actually had to borrow money to take the workshop back then because I didn't have much money, but it was worth it. It was very, very influential for me more than anything else. Inspirational, I should say. And actually at that time when I started painting, this was back in 2009, so it's been just over 10 years. I was at Open Studio with a gal who mentioned Richard Schmid, and I said, "Who's Richard Schmid?" And she said, "Oh, he went to the Palette and Chisel." I said, "Oh, what's the Palette and Chisel?" And she said, "You need to go move to Chicago." And so I did. And I went to the Palette and Chisel, which is a club where you can draw and paint models every single day of the week. They just give you a key to the mansion, and you go in and you work, and mostly alla prima, like one session paintings and drawings. And I did that for 3 years, and that's kind of how I learned how to paint and draw, at least the beginning of how I learned to paint and draw.
What size ballpoint do you prefer? Somebody's asking.
Oh, I don't really have a preference. I don't like really, really fine ones. I know they make artist ones that are super small, but I actually prefer a broader one so I can make a nice soft stroke like this. I actually grew up, did the drawings on the originally on just those Bic stick pens,
Yeah.
the really inexpensive ones that you can get a pack of them for $2, and that was always my favorite. Now I just use whatever I find lying around.
Ballpoint pens sometimes get a glob of ink on the tip of it.
Yeah.
What do you do with that? You
That's a good point. I used to get in the habit. This one doesn't do it too much, but those Bic ones did a lot. And I would get in the habit of always having a page off on the side, and I would just every few strokes I would clean it off like that.
Yeah.
And for a sketch like this, I don't really care too much if it globs, but for a finished drawing that I put like 30 or 40 hours into, I'm very diligent about cleaning it off every few strokes to make sure there's no globs.
Somebody's asking what kind of pen is that? Is it erasable ink?
Oh no, it's very not erasable. Although it does have this cool rubber thing at the end. I don't think it's erasable. No.
It's probably a stylus.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's probably a stylus. This is from Wild Horse Gallery in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Thank you, Wild Horse Gallery.
Yeah, take a handful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I love pens. Pens.
Well, I know you've seen the ballpoint pen drawings that Stephen Assail has done.
Oh yes.
And
gorgeous.
He has a preference, and it's a pen that nobody makes anymore. And he bought boxes and boxes of them, 20 years ago when he heard they were going to stop making them. And he gave me one. I don't know what kind it is. I have it, but I don't know what kind it is.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, I would lose pens too quickly to have a favorite. Especially with kids, they see one lying around and then I'll never see it again.
Yeah. Well, get used to that. They take everything.
Yeah, it's true. So I'm just going across the form here, and this is pretty much how I would continue to take it out, going across the form, the direction of the form, and then sort of crisscrossing over based off of what I know of anatomy. Something like this could be brought up to be the full value of what I'm observing. But the hope is by the end of it, all these subtle crisscrosses are going to indicate the anatomical structure quite a bit more. Now, for a sketch purpose, usually this is as far as I would take it just for a quick sketch.
Yeah.
And then I would always have the option of, if I have more time with the model or if this was a painting that I was studying in a museum, especially, I would probably sit here for an hour and a half maybe and just go to town trying to observe and understand all the detail that I'm seeing.
So your temptation is you're not really ever pressing very hard and getting a whole lot of darks.
Right.
You're keeping it very light. Would you just, we've got a few minutes left if you want to noodle it some more, but maybe you could hold it up so people could see it a little more closely.
Yeah, let's see if I can get something like there.
Yeah, it's reflecting in the light, maybe getting a little glare. Tilt it forward. There you go. That's beautiful.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's an undervalued medium.
So you said that you're using it to kind of understand how to build up form of your paints. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, let me see if I can get the painting up here and maybe get some close-up shots of it that don't have too much glare. Let me see here.
Who made that frame?
This is from Masterworks.
Oh, they do such beautiful work.
Yeah, I really like what they've got going on. Let's see if I can maybe show the face here. So, are you seeing the face without glare? I think you are.
Pretty much, yeah. It's got a little on her right cheek.
Okay. So it's hard to see because this is a pretty small painting. I mean, her head's only so big. But after I get through laying down all of the color, I let it set up sometimes until the next day, and then I soften it out. And then I take a tiny, tiny little brush, super tiny, and I dip it in stacked lead white made by Michael Harding. He makes this really, really great stacked lead white that you can get kind of stringy. And I lay it on and I just pull it right across the form in the same way I was making those last sketch marks. And what it does is it creates these tiny little marks that look like fleshy pores going around the anatomy on such an imperceptible scale that it doesn't look as though her face is unpleasantly textured. It just looks a little more like naturally textured skin. And the nice thing about the stacked lead white is that it's a transparent white, so it's not really creating a huge value shift. It might change the value just a little bit, but not too much. Mostly it's just giving it this sort of viscous workability where you can model with the paint.
But you're not doing it straight out of the tube. You're doing it with a little color in it, yes?
Sometimes no. It just depends on the area and what's underneath, because some of these colors actually, I use really highly pigmented colors, lakes and whatnot, and they're very strong tinters. So when I lay the stacked lead white over it, especially in such a small amount, the stacked lead white just sort of picks up the color from underneath it without needing much of anything else. And it's a warm white too, so you don't make your flesh tones chalky. They stay a nice rich color. So sometimes I'll tint the lead white a little bit, but really just a hair. I'm not mixing full on color again. It's mostly just taking a little bit of the white and plopping it on. And as long as the painting is wet when you do that, then the stacked lead white just fuses with that color underneath. And it retains all that chroma, not like titanium. If I did it with titanium, you just see like white streaks all over the painting. But the stacked lead white there, it has this magical quality. And you can, when you look at old paintings, you can see how they were getting all those textures and all that subtlety and all that warmth. And it was really because of the stacked lead white they were using. So, and then of course I'm using different techniques in some of the surrounding areas. You know, this becomes a lot more impressionistic, and then the background becomes very impressionistic. I'm trying to make it as thin as possible, really. Am I still with you, Eric?
Yeah. Yes, okay. You are.
This is pretty much the process that I'm using on all of my current paintings. And so I have to rely on the Impressionist painting, the alla prima that I did before, because that's how I'm handling the backgrounds. I have to rely on the anatomy studies I've done, because that's how I'm finishing off the painting.
Right.
You know, various layering techniques that I'm implementing. So it runs across the board there.
Cool. So you're are you wrapped up on your drawing now, or you need?
Yeah, I think we're pretty good with the sketch, and honestly, I'm not sure how much power I have left on my phone, and I don't want to just cut right out.
Okay, well, let's get you back on camera real quickly. All right. Well, Tim, this is fascinating. I've never actually watched anybody do a delicate drawing like that with a ball point. So that was fascinating. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have a studio to show you guys. I was telling Eric that I close on my studio in just a couple weeks, so I will be having paintings up on the wall again, and things will be back to normal, hopefully.
Well, why don't you do this? Why don't you ping me when you get it to where you want it, and then we'll do a studio visit one day.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good.
Well, how about a round of applause and thumbs up and hearts for Tim Rees? That was fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Tim is going to be on the comments today. He's going to be doing. You're going to see a little bit of how he does this painting, which is a big painting, and the video is called Modern Figures. And today only, when we show it, there's a very special discount price. So you get that today at Streamline Art Video on YouTube or Facebook. Just search Streamline Art Video. Tim, thank you so much. This has been fascinating.
Thank you, Eric. It was good talking with you.